Okay, so let's continue the skeletal system. So as I mentioned before, in this skeletal system, you don't only have one tissue, you have multiple types of tissues. So the second type of tissue that's going to be found there is cartilage. And the third type of tissue is the dense, regular connective tissue. So this stuff is soft structure that's making up, your nose, it's hyaline cartilage, and your ears, that's elastic cartilage. But when you look at your skull, there's an empty space on the skull where your nose is, and you don't see external ear. That's because cartilage is soft tissue, and when bone dries out of the soft tissue becomes decomposed and it goes away. So the cartilage is not only found in your nose and your ears, but also found at the end of your long bones, like here. And the reason that they're there because they help to cushion the long bones. When you have a joint and the bones are constantly moving against each other, they wouldn't get damaged if you have this cartilage there. If you didn't have cartilage there, then the soft cartilage is, not there. Then the person will eventually start to get pain in their knees and joints, and that's because so someone who's been maybe old, their cartilage kind of wears away, and then eventually the bones start to rub against each other, and that's quite painful. That's called osteoarthritis. So let me write that down for you. Um, Osteoarthritis. So osteo means bone, and then arthritis means damage to the joints. So osteo stands for bone, and artho stands for joints, and then osteoarthritis means damage to the joints. And then I also want to mention the word itis. Itis means inflammation. It stands for inflammation. So what's happening here is you are, so this is hyaline cartilage, major part of the matrix. So what's happening here is you have your blood and the cartilage, and once this cartilage wears away, all that blood kind of starts to come here, and the bones start to rub against each other, and there's some inflammation that happens, and that causes pain. So if you start having bone wear away, so that's because bones are rubbing against each other, it can get quite painful, known as osteoarthritis, damage to the joints. So people who run a lot, people that run marathons, they get osteoarthritis a lot earlier in their life compared to the people who don't run. But it's not to say that you shouldn't run. There are lots of benefits of running that are much higher than the cost of the osteoarthritis. So I do encourage everybody to exercise. So, all right. So what cartilage looks like. So this is what it looks like under the microscope. This is the histology of cartilage. So this, depending on what you stain it with, it's usually stained bluish purple. So let me see if I can find an image for you. So I just did a simple image search of hyaline cartilage histology, and this is what came up. So you'll see most of the slides looking bluish purple. So this is what it looks like, and this is the usual stain that's used. Um, all this stuff is matrix, and inside the matrix you got these holes that uh, the holes is going to be called lacunae, the space. So here's another picture. This is called lacunae. Inside the lacunae, you have a cell that's called chondrocyte. So this is a matrix, and you have the space, lacuna. And if there were multiple spaces we're talking about, they'll be called lacunae, like this one here, lacunae. And the cells that sit inside the lacunae or the space are called chondrocytes. So chondrocytes. So that's what it looks like. Chondro stands for cartilage. So the word chondro stands for cartilage. And then again, cyte means cell. So you already know what cyte stands for. So chondrocyte would be the cartilage cell. If you remember from general biology, sharks are called chondriotes. And for those, who maybe know something about fish, chondro means cartilage, and it stands for fish. That refers to the fish that have cartilage in their bones. So they just call it chondrocytes. Let me write that for you. I may have pronounced it wrong. There. I think I missed the R there. That's what they call fish or sharks, to be specific. So what's going to happen is when your cartilage forms, um, there are cells that are called chondroblast. They are going to produce the cartilage matrix, and then when they mature, they become chondrocytes, and they're collagen fibers evenly distributed in the matrix. So for the most part, you don't have the rings that you find in the bone. If you remember, in the bone, there were rings that looked like tree trunks, or osteon, which was comprised of the rings. So, and then there was this big hole in the middle. So you don't have that here. In the college, just have these almost yellowish matrix, and then there's going to be a cluster of cells every now and then. So it's not lots of cells, maybe 3 to 5 cells at a time. So they don't occur by themselves, they occur in clusters, so anywhere from 3 or 5 cells, and then they're going to be inside these spaces called lacunae, and which is the same thing that we would use to describe the space where the osteocytes were sitting in the bone. So here's a close-up. I mentioned that they occur in clusters, so you can see those clusters here. This is where you find cartilage. So you find cartilage actually in very many spaces in your body. So sternum, covering up surfaces of long bones and synovial joints, and then they occur in these clusters. So where your ribs are connected to your spine, that's where you will find these. And if there's a slip disc, and that's going to be the cartilage that slips out. So it's found in lots of different places in your body. If you take the long bone, and at the growth level, you go ahead and name the different parts, or the growth level, you name different parts. And over here, we have this part called diaphysis. It's the shaft. So basically, it's a part of the bone that's going to be called shaft, and the name for it is diaphysis. And then there's a top part here that's called epiphysis. So you got two places where epiphysis is found. It's found, here, and then it's found here. So you have epiphysis on both ends. What distinguishes one from the other is one is proximal. So the part that's going to be connected to the hip is going to be proximal epiphysis, and the one that's away from the hip, if you remember this from the first chapter, is called distal epiphysis. So what the word epiphysis means. So the word physis, physis means line, and then if you remember, epi means on top from the previous chapters. So the word epiphysis means there's a line that's on top. So maybe you can see it, maybe you can't, but there's a line that's on both ends here. So that's epiphysis basically means the line on top of the line. So I think what people were trying to identify was that there was this imaginary line right there, and then there was a part that was on top of the line, and then there was a part that was on the bottom of the line, or not bottom, it's still, they still call this on the top on the other end. So they're both called epiphysis. And then there is proximal epiphysis and distal epiphysis. And then there's this word called metaphysis. So that's where the epiphysis is connected to the diaphysis basically. So that's where the metaphysis would be. The word meta, it means beyond. So the word meta means beyond. And then there's, I'm just going to write this down for now. So the word meta means beyond. That means the line, you know, the term, that means it's just beyond the apophysis line, basically. That's how you would say. And then diaphysis has di in it, di, that means two. So that's the word, that's a part that's between the two lines. So this is beyond the line, and this is between the two lines. So that's where all those terms are kind of coming from. So those are the sections of the long bone. So when I ask you, when I put a sticker here and ask you what this part is called, you're going to say apophysis. And if I put a sticker on this long part of the bone, then you're going to call it diaphysis. I'm not going to ask you metaphysis in the lab. So the but however, the word metaphysis, the term metaphysis might show up on the lecture exam because that's multiple choice. But I'm not going to ask you about it in the lab. And the reason is because you can't really see the physical line. You can't really see where it starts and where it ends. So that's why I decided never to ask my students about that on the exam, because you can't tell where it starts and where it ends. Okay, so we have this femur that's going to be cut long ways in the lab, and we'll set it out for you for the lab exams. And part of the uh, femur is compact bone, and part of it is spongy bone. This is the spongy bone. So the part that's hard on both sides, right here and right here, this is called the compact bone. So I can put a sticker on this part and ask you what this part is called. So you're gonna say compact bone. In the middle, you have the medullary cavity. And then you have this spongy stuff going on here in this area. That's the spongy bone. It's called tubercle of spongy bone. So I can put a sticker here as well. And then you will call it spongy bone. And then if you go ahead and shine light through the bone, you will notice it has different densities. It's less dense in this area and more dense here. So there's going to be denser parts of the bone that are going to be stronger. If an old person who has osteoporosis, they fall down and break their hip, the hip is going to break in this area, and that's because this is the part of the bone that is not as dense as the other part. So it's a little bit weaker. So that's where most people break their hip. Okay. So next we have are the layers. So we have the periosteum and endosteum. On the outside of the bone, there's this thing called periosteum. And let's say you look at the bone and you cut it and then you do a cross section. And then once you do a cross section, you're gonna have the medullary cavity in the middle. So let me see if I can show you that. So let's go back on the last slide. I think you can see a little bit better. So you have the medullary cavity here, and on the outside, you have this periosteum layer. And so I'll try to draw that for you if it's not making sense. So you have this cross section if you cut this bone, and you have this compact part, and inside you have this medullary cavity, and then periosteum is this line or layer on the outside. So this is what's called periosteum. I just try to make an arrow for periosteum. So that's periosteum, the outer surface of the bone. It consists of fibrous layer and osteogenic cells or osteogenic layer. So this is the layer where you have most of the growth going on. Osteo means bone, genic means to generate. So osteogenic cells are generating osteoblast here. So osteoblast stands for building, and if you have a bruise on your bone, you have like this fracture, then the osteoblast. Osteogenic are going to generate osteoblast that'll quickly go in and repair the bone and maintain that bone. And if you look at it under the microscope, I'm not going to ask you to identify it at this level. You will be able to see the osteoblast and lacunae, obviously, if it's a compact bone slide, but you might not be able to see osteogenic. It isolates and protect the bone. So the function of the periosteum is to its attachment for circulatory and nervous system or supply. This is where you have your nerves that are attached. And I remember I said that your blood vessel need to go in there to feed the osteocytes, otherwise they're going to deprive of the nutrients. So osteoblasts, they're actively involved in the bone repair and growth. And this is a place where you have, you know, in your ligaments and your tendons, they are connected, and that's where you're going to have ends of long bones then fused into periosteum. And if you have a ligament like ACL or anterior cruciate ligament, it's going to be attached to the periosteum as well. So actively participates in bone growth and repair, attaches bone to the connective tissue. On the other hand side of this, so this is periosteum, but on the inside, you have another layer that's called endosteum. So this is called endosteum. It's the inner surface of the bone. So that's our cross section. And this is again, if you were to cut the long bone and you would looking at the cross section. So this is a cavity inside called, this is where again medullary cavity is, and then the inner surface of the bone is called endosteum. It lines the medullary cavity and consists of osteoprogenitor cells. So it's the inner surface of your bone. That's where your bone marrow is going to be, because sometimes your body need to make a whole bigger medullary cavity, and it needs to be bigger, and you need to have your, this is also where your osteoclast cells are. So osteoclast cells are for active repair and growth, and we call it remodeling. So actively involved in repair and growth. We call it remodeling. That means change the shape of the bone, and this is accomplished by osteoclast cells, and they are found in the layer. It's called endosteum. So osteoclasts are going to go ahead and eat away at the bone, making a medullary cavity bigger to change the shape of it. And then if you need to go ahead and recruit other types of cells like osteoprogenitor cells that refers to the stem cells, they can also change into osteoblast and can build the bone there once it ends up changing and modifying the bone. So the inner layer is called endosteum. So I'm going to stop this video here, and then we'll continue with the bone growth and development in the next video.